while attempting to park. The driver of a Porsche Taycan was recorded on a neighbor's surveillance camera crashing into an SUV and careening off the side of a hill into another car. In November of 2020, CCTV captured the Porsche inching its way up a sloped driveway in the coastal town of Manningtree in Essex, England. The unidentified motorist was believed to have purchased a luxury vehicle which possessed an estimated value of more than $112,000 just 5 days prior to the unfortunate mishap. The driver is then thought to have accidentally stepped on the accelerator rather than the brake, which caused the vehicle to lurch forward suddenly and collide directly into a car parked next door. The Porsche's wayward trajectory continued as it hurtled over a wall and landed on top of a vehicle parked in the street. Motoring experts who watched the video recording have speculated that the driver had fallen victim to the Taycan's instant torque, which might have been triggered due to the motorist stepping on the gas pedal too aggressively. Number 7. The West Dublin stabbing. An Irish man named Gareth Kelly was fatally stabbed during a parking dispute in the Dublin suburb of Kingswood on February the 25th of 2020. In the moments leading up to the incident, the 39-year-old had reportedly been looking under the hood of his car and trying to identify a problem after he'd been unable to start the engine. His vehicle was parked outside the Browns Barnwood estate in West Dublin, where authorities believed the man had spent the previous night with his partner. A 38-year-old woman by the name of Christina Anderson, who resided in the estate herself, approached Kelly as he inspected his car and initiated an argument regarding his vehicle's parking space. She claimed that Kelly wasn't authorized to park his car in the particular spot it had occupied overnight. The altercation eventually escalated to the point where Anderson brandished a sharp-edged implement, which she ultimately used to stab Kelly. When emergency responders arrived at the scene shortly after 7 a.m., the victim had already succumbed to the wounds Anderson had inflicted. The mother of 3 was arrested and charged with Kelly's murder. Anderson's attorney requested that she be given medical and psychiatric assessment before her fate was to be decided in court. Number 6. The Queen's parking dispute. At around 1:45 p.m. on December the 17th of 2021, 2 men got into a heated argument over a parking space in the New York City borough of Queens. According to detectives in charge of the investigation, one of the individuals pulled out a firearm during the altercation and used it to fire a single round into the other man's left hand. The gunman then fled the scene in his vehicle, while the victim was able to drive himself to Jamaica Hospital Medical Center in order to receive treatment for his gunshot wound. As of the NYPD's latest updates on the case, investigators were still searching for the suspect responsible for the shooting. Surveillance images from the scene of the incident were released so that members of the public might contribute in identifying the person of interest. It was reported that the man who'd been shot had received the requisite medical attention and was subsequently released from the hospital. Number 5. Charles and Iris Steen Hunt. On the morning of October the 23rd of 2019, an elderly couple from University Park, Illinois, plummeted to their deaths after their car smashed through the wall of a parking garage. The 2 victims were identified by the Marion County coroner as Charles Hunt and his wife, Iris Steen, both in their early 70s. Investigators were able to establish that the latter had been behind the wheel of the couple's black Lincoln MKX at the time of the accident. The SUV had been parked on the 4th floor of the Market Square Center garage in Indianapolis, Indiana, where the Hunts had been visiting an ill relative. Under circumstances that the authorities struggled to determine, Iris Steen had lost control of the vehicle and it consequently plowed through the garage's concrete wall. The car then crashed into the concrete alleyway below, landing directly on its roof. The 2 passengers were reportedly killed on impact as a result of blunt force trauma, and the medical examiner who conducted their autopsies ruled their deaths an accident. It was reported that Charles had served in the Vietnam War and that the couple would spend much of their time at the University Park chapter of the Veterans of Foreign War Support Group prior to the tragic incident that claimed their lives. Number 4. Victoria Strauss. On the night of January the 18th of 2021, a woman died at a parking garage in Columbus, Ohio, after she'd gotten trapped between her car and a payment kiosk. The incident wasn't reported until the following morning, when a security guard arrived at his post to discover that the 23-year-old victim, identified as Victoria Strauss, was already dead. Investigators deduced that the fatal accident had been set in motion by Strauss dropping her credit card while attempting to pay for parking at around 11:37 p.m. The young woman opened her car door in an effort to reach for the card on the ground, but she ended up accidentally accelerating her vehicle as a result of her body's awkward positioning. Her head became lodged in between the door frame and the payment machine after the car had smashed directly into the kiosk. The Franklin County coroner determined Strauss's death to have been primarily caused by blunt force trauma to the head, which she'd suffered from the collision with the machine. It also emerged that the woman's blood alcohol level had been 0.221% at the time, and the medical examiner therefore listed acute ethanol poisoning among their findings. Number 3. The shooting of KIANA Singleton. On January the 24th of 2021, an argument over a parking spot ended in the fatal shooting of 25-year-old KIANA Singleton. Surveillance cameras positioned outside the M-Bar Sports Grill in Jackson, Mississippi, captured the incident, which took place shortly before 3 a.m. As suggested by the footage, a woman in a black Range Rover had confronted the occupants of another vehicle in the parking lot of the establishment. When the latter car began to drive away, the Range Rover proceeded to follow closely behind. As both vehicles exited the parking lot, a passenger in the Range Rover opened fire on the other car. The shooter was later identified by witnesses as Organa Funches. She was out on bond at the time on a previous murder charge that hadn't yet gone to trial. Additional gunshots were fired by Funches as the Range Rover continued to tail the fleeing vehicle. Local police ultimately found Singleton's dead body inside the car that had been shot upon. Funches had been ordered to adhere to a 10 p.m. curfew as a condition of her bond, which she'd violated by being out until the early morning hours. Upon being remanded back into custody, she was handed down another first-degree murder charge, in addition to a charge of drive-by shooting. Although Funches had initially been granted a $1 million bond by a Jackson Municipal Court judge, that mandate was later revoked by a county judge. In the aftermath of the shooting, Singleton's family publicly questioned why her killer had been allowed to roam the streets unmonitored while still facing a pending murder charge. Number 2. The Ontario COSTCO Brawl. In May of 2016, two middle-aged couples were involved in a violent altercation in a parking lot in Ontario, Canada. The fight reportedly broke out at approximately 2:15 p.m. on May the 28th, outside a Costco in the city of Mississauga. The initial disagreement was allegedly centered on a parking space that both parties coveted. As tensions between them heightened, bystander Joe Carrero took out his cell phone and began recording the argument. The video he subsequently captured showed the disgruntled individuals shouting at each other while standing in the path of other shoppers. They eventually moved themselves and their vehicles out of the way, but the confrontation continued nonetheless. At one point in the row, one of the men pushed the other woman to the ground, thus triggering the all-out brawl. Once the couples had been separated by concerned witnesses, a Costco employee tended to one of the men who'd suffered a bloody gash to his forehead during the fight. In the video, which Carrero shared with local police before uploading to YouTube, the injured man's daughter could be seen crying as she watched her father being treated. Number 1. The killing of Marquise McLaughlin. A 28-year-old man was gunned down outside a convenience store in Clearwater, Florida, following a confrontation over the misuse of a parking spot reserved for the disabled on July the 19th of 2018. The shooting was captured by the store's security cameras, and the resulting footage was used extensively in support of the gunman's prosecution. The victim, Marquise McLaughlin, had reportedly picked up his girlfriend Brittany Jacobs from her workplace shortly before the onset of the incident. The couple, along with their 3 children, then drove to the Circle A food store. As she pulled into the parking lot, Jacobs parked in the only reserved space available outside the store, despite the fact that their vehicle was not outfitted with a disability placard. McLaughlin then exited the car and entered the store alongside his 5-year-old son to buy some snacks for the ride home. As Jacobs and the other 2 children waited in the car, a local resident named Michael Drika, aged 47, parked in close proximity to Jacobs. After stepping out of his SUV, Drika began examining the exterior of the woman's minivan, purportedly searching for a disability placard. The man, whom it would later emerge had been parked illegally as well, confronted Jacobs about her unauthorized use of the space. At about 3:30 p.m., McLaughlin emerged from the store, walked up to Drika and pushed him to the pavement. McLaughlin approached the man as he sat on the ground, at which point Drika pulled out a .40 caliber Glock and pointed it in the father of three's direction. McLaughlin immediately backed away when confronted with the weapon. In spite of his aggressor's apparent retreat, Drika fired a single round into the young man's chest as he turned towards the store. The victim ran back inside and collapsed in front of his son. Paramedics arrived 19 minutes later and rushed McLaughlin to Morton Plant Hospital, where he was pronounced dead. Drika was initially acquitted of any criminal responsibility for McLaughlin's death, in accordance with Florida's Stand Your Ground law. However, the investigation was eventually passed off to State Attorney Bernie McCabe, who charged the gunman with a single count of manslaughter. In October of 2019, Drika was sentenced to 20 years in prison for the deadly shooting. Thanks for watching. Would you rather have to park your car 2 miles away from your house, or always be late to wherever you're going, no matter when you leave? Let us know in the comments section below.